of 2025, the armed forces of Ukraine have attacked 27 fuel and energy facilities on the territory of Russia. The strikes were mainly carried out using drones.
At 6:02 a.m., a swarm of Ukrainian drones slipped through Russian radar and turned Ryazan's $1.5 billion refinery into a battlefield. But here's the twist. This wasn't about blowing the place sky high. It was about precision, chaos, and engineering, a domino effect inside one of Russia's most critical fuel arteries.
Thanks to the war in Ukraine, and Russian officials say a fire has been extinguished at the Kursk nuclear power plant after air defenses shot down a Ukrainian drone. The authorities say a transformer was damaged by falling debris. President Zelensky has accused Moscow of doing everything possible to prevent a meeting with President Putin aimed at ending the war. Meanwhile, heavy Russian attacks on Ukraine have continued in the past week. But radiation levels are normal and there's no wider danger. Ukraine has also been targeting oil refineries in recent weeks.
How do you dismantle a fortress without storming the gates? Stick with us because the answer will show you how modern war no longer looks like tanks on a battlefield. It looks like steel towers falling from the inside out. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
So Russia has blamed Ukraine for this attack on the power plant. The power plant put out a statement saying that there was a drone attack. The drone got shot down, and as it fell, there was debris. So the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, has just said he's arrived in Kyiv, so we'll be at events with the President. President Zelensky has also put out a statement put out a video talking about independence and the importance of independence in Ukraine that caused a fire. That fire was put out. There was no effect on radiation, there were no casualties, but of course the International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly called for restraint from both sides when it comes to nuclear facilities. So this, of course...
Russia believed the Ryazan oil refinery was beyond reach, its walls guarded not by soldiers, but by layers of technology, surveillance, and air defenses. Yet Ukraine chose this specific target for a reason. On paper, Ryazan is a massive artery, valued at roughly $1.5 billion, feeding more than just oil. It supplies gasoline, diesel, and even jet fuel deep into Russia's logistical system. Cutting into it wasn't about property damage, it was about striking at the bloodstream of an entire war economy. So why this exact site? Because destroying tanks in the field slows an advance, but crippling an industrial core strangles the ability to fight tomorrow. The temptation to strike Ryazan had existed since the beginning of the war, but the defenses looked unmatched. Around the complex, Russia stationed surface-to-air missile systems, some of the most advanced in the world, designed to scan hundreds of kilometers into Ukrainian skies.
Saying that such a goal is worth living for, and this is what we stand for. But events are more subdued than they have been in the past. In the past, there would have been big parades through the centre of Kyiv. Now, big gatherings like that are no longer. I think people here are just waiting to see what happens. There's been so many talks, there's been so many back and forths. I think very few people really think anything will come out of any talks because they're war weary. They've been going through a war, since the full-scale invasion of 2022. But still, it's a very important day here. Elsewhere, Ukrainians have been asked to make sure that to mark this event. And of course, in the UK as well, the government has said that they will be raising the Ukrainian flag on government buildings, including
S-400 launchers, radar arrays, and patrols of MiG-31 interceptors created a dome that, according to Moscow's own claims, could neutralize any incoming attack before it came close. This wasn't a forgotten industrial relic. It operated as a fortress, linked to air defense grids and command centers. A direct strike looked suicidal. Sending even a dozen drones on a straight-line path would have meant easy hunting for long-range interceptors. That belief that nothing could pass through was exactly what Ukraine sought to use against them. When the attack began, the first wave didn't carry explosives at all. These were scouts, cheap and disposable, flying at tree level where ground clutter confused radar. They skimmed over forests, low enough that even locals mistook them for birds. That was deliberate. Ukrainian engineers had modified their electronic signatures to mimic natural patterns, forcing Russian radar screens to display a confusing mix of flocks, shadows, and scattered dots. The air defense crews knew some of them were drones, but they couldn't distinguish which ones mattered. Every unnecessary missile launched meant fewer weapons ready for the real strike. At the same time, Ukrainian jets tasked with a completely different mission created chaos across the border. They hit Russian outposts and radar nodes, not to destroy them, but to disable their vision temporarily. Pilots jammed frequencies, sent false pings, and left Russian command centers sifting through silence. The result was an electronic blackout. Controllers inside Russia didn't know whether they were looking at flocks of birds, spoofed returns, or a genuine assault. For the first time in years, their protective dome around Ryazan was blind. Then came the strangest element of all, machines far smaller than jets or drones. Ukrainian operators deployed compact, unmanned ground vehicles, almost toy-like in appearance, creeping into service corridors of the refinery. They weren't armed. These robots carried cameras, sensors, and mapping software, rolling through tunnels and narrow access points that even human saboteurs couldn't safely enter. Their job was to identify choke points, joints, valves, electrical nodes, where a small amount of targeted damage could disrupt the entire chain of operations. In effect, they remapped Ryazan from the inside, line by line, while Ukrainian crews hundreds of kilometers away watched every corner of the plant appear on their screens in real time. That intelligence shift replaced guesswork with precision. Instead of aiming at giant oil tanks or stacks that could burn without breaking supply, Ukraine suddenly had the full blueprint of weak spots. A refinery looks indestructible from above. Steel towers, pressure units, and miles of piping give the impression of redundancy. But every industrial complex has a handful of single points of failure, parts that keep the rest of the system alive. Ukraine found them, and once they were mapped, explosives and drones could be used sparingly, focusing firepower where it mattered most. The attack no longer relied on brute force. It wasn't about storming walls with swarms of drones in the hope that one would slip through. It was about disorienting defenses, tricking sensors, and using robotics to turn a billion-dollar giant into a fragile network. Deception, electronic warfare, aerial tricks, and quiet mechanical scouts created a synchronized picture of how to dismantle Ryazan like a puzzle. With that picture complete and the defenders overwhelmed by decoys and noise, Ukraine shifted gears. The next phase wouldn't be surgical scouts or sleepy radar screens. It would be saturation, hitting so many angles at once that even the strongest fortress couldn't hold. Chaos itself would become the weapon. Modern battles no longer depend on armored divisions smashing through borders. They unfold in silent strikes against energy plants, data cables, and industries that guarantee survival. A drone swarm at low altitude or a robot crawling underground can disable more than artillery shells ever could. What Ukraine exposed at Ryazan is the shift from visible armies to invisible precision. If $1 billion facility could be dismantled without soldiers crossing the fence, then airports, radar stations, or power plants may face the same risk tomorrow. Subscribe now for deeper breakdowns on how these evolving tactics are reshaping global conflict.